Zeldris, you must become stronger to become king. Thank you to our $5 patrons, Strawbones, Red4765, Midnight Gemlord, Sean, and Artgoon. And a very big thank you to our $25 patron, Alex Ice Rose. Now, we're on this breakdown / discussion on how mighty Zeldris would be if he ended up in Purgatory. Please remember to leave your own thoughts on how strong Zeldris would be in the comment section down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, hit that little notification bell to miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below. You support result as one, count them one, download the videos, early content, and more. Also, now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, let's hop into the discussion. What's up, guys? Pencil here, and here we are to talk about how mighty Zeldris, the second prince of the demon realm, would be if he was trapped in Purgatory for over 1,000 years. Notably, he should become quite powerful. But how powerful? That's the question of the video. So the thing is, I guess the immediate thing we have to answer is, could Zeldris actually survive Purgatory? Like, does he really have enough of that dog in him to survive Purgatory? You know, the realm of absolute destruction and chaos and everything, and pain and agony and misery. And I think the answer is yes. This is mainly because, like, his dad was able to do it. And we have no context for their mom. Like, legitimately, as cool as it would be to have context for the mother of Meliodas and Zeldris, other than knowing that they exist, they were not just pooped into existence by the... Sounds so bad. Popped into existence, not pooped into existence. The fact that they were just popped into existence by the Demon King, they do have a mom, maybe that they can't, but Purgatory and Demon World conditions seem pretty similar as is. For 1, 2, the Demon King's able to do it just fine. 3, Meliodas' soul is able to make it there, and sure, you may be able to argue that, well, the soul is different from the body, and thusly, Zeldris' soul wouldn't be able to survive there. But if Meliodas' soul is strong enough to survive there, I feel like Zeldris' soul plus his body should be enough to survive there. And reasonably, if he has even a fraction of 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 his father's longevity and potential for survival, he should be just fine. I think there's no real issue with Zeldris existing in Purgatory. It would just suck for a very long time. He just wouldn't be having a good time. You couldn't bring Gelda with him either. I think Gelda would actually end up getting torn up. But Zeldris should be fine. Even like a post-series Zeldris who lost all of his amps. Like, no DKP, no piety. Like, straight up, a regular Zeldris should be fine. So there's that issue out the way. But the question is, how strong would he get? And the thing is, there are a couple ways to approach this. One, if you think Purgatory acts as a linear potential amp, right? Like, if you think it does, then Zeldris would get insanely bonkers, stupid, dumb, crazy strong. Like, if you just think going into Purgatory for X amount of years multiplies your power by B, then Bon, who went into Purgatory, like, what's his best feat? Tearing an off-guard Melascula's neck. And that's about it. Tearing an off-guard Melascula's neck. Bro's still a beginning of series sin level threat by the time he goes into Purgatory. He's like struggling out here with commandments. He can't even slurp up all the gallon's strength. Bro's really suffering. Bro's out here weaker than Demon Mark beginning of series Meliodas, unless he's like love amped or something like that. But even then, Meliodas was probably suppressed during that fight. Bon was fodder. And you know what Bon did after coming out? Let me put something into perspective for you, right? He went head-to-head with DK Meliodas. Now, is DK Meliodas the strongest variation of the Demon King? No. We'll do a whole video talking about that another day, but he isn't. But when I tell you the difference between a beginning of series sin tier threat and the Demon King is bonkers. I know the Demon King had the upper hand the moment like Meliodas was oppressed and stuff like that within his head, and he had more control over the body, but he wasn't like one-shotting Bon. He wasn't able to instantly execute a non-immortal Bon. And nah, he was still struggling just a little bit to hold that brother back. He had to constantly engage with him. He actually had to use his hands. And you want to know like the level of difference that is between these two variations of the character with just about 1,000 years in Purgatory? So, like, if we were to do a hypothetical tier list, or a scaling metric, just a line of power, you have the Demon King Meliodas, and then you have right beneath him a post-Purgatory Bon. And then beneath that, you have an overwhelming gap in power to the point where the prime variations of Meliodas and Elizabeth were powerless before them. And then you have Prime Meliodas and Prime Elizabeth, and then you have hypothetically a Prime DML, then a Prime Mael, then Ludishel and full amps Zeldris, then the original demon, then Chandler and Cusack at full power, then 3 Commandment Mael, then Sariel and Tarmiel, then you have the rest of the commandments, then you have Matrona, then you have more in between, and then finally, at the very bottom of this food chain, at the very bottom of this pecking order, you have beginning of series Bond, pre-Purgatory Bond. For reference, I just went over like 11 characters. And like the gap in between these characters is not small. Like, think of the gap between just hypothetically, think of the gap between Galland and Ludishel. And then think of the gap between Ludishel and the Demon King. And realize that a pre-Purgatory Bond went into Purgatory and had the most epic, legendary, next-level training. The Hyperbolic Time Chamber could never. It leaped him above all those characters. Bond went from weaker by massive margins than every single commandment to being able to literally solo them all with his eyes closed. That's how massive Purgatory was as an amp. And we gotta remember, Bond went in there weak. Fodder. Booty me. Obviously, he's still a really strong character before he went to Purgatory. Don't get me wrong. He's still beastly before he went to Purgatory. But the gap in power is crazy. And the reason I say it's so nutty, if it's just like a flat multiplier, like you do A, which is the initial person going in's base strength, as it were, and then B, just a linear Purgatory amp, 1,000 years in Purgatory equals X multiplier, however big you want to say the gap is numbers wise, then think about Zeldris getting that exact same flat amp. Zeldris in that little scaling chain I did is like 3 rungs below, or no, 3 or 4 rungs below like the Demon King, plus the overwhelming gap in power. And obviously it's not necessarily close between the gaps even above Zeldris, but he's going in with a lot higher base potential than Bond. Like, sure, Zeldris is implied to have trained with Meliodas and stuff like that, but Zeldris, once again, is a demon prince. Brody was born strong. Sure, was he Meliodas tier? No, but he wasn't the main character, so he was never going to be Meliodas tier. Was he Demon King tier? No, he was the Demon King. The big old DK, if you will. He's final villain tier. He ain't going to be as strong as the final villain unless you're the main character. But still, the gap between Zeldris, even without any of his amps, and Bond is like 2 entirely different dimensions. You can't even mention them in the same tier. Like they're like 3 tiers in between the beginning of the series Bond and Zeldris. And that's just in terms of their starting power before they go in. So Zeldris already has a massive, hefty, gargantuan, whatever other adjectives you would like to use, humongous Garfungus. I have no idea what that word I just said is. But still, he has that massive, that girthy of a lead on Bond in terms of just like raw starting potential, where the two begin at in terms of where they're going to be going into Purgatory. So give Zeldris that flat multiplier amp and he may just become... Okay, strongest in the verse is a little bit too much. Not strongest in the verse, but like still... The leap would be bonkers. The leap would be drastic. He would be ragdolling his father, essentially. Like, you know how base Meliodas pulled up on the Demon King in Zeldris' body and was playing patty cake with his head for the most part throughout that entire fight? Yeah, I think the exact same thing would happen with Zeldris. Like, he would straight come out, pull up on DK Mel, and just start wombo comboing him. Because once again, we gotta realize Zeldris is already in his regular state. Well, not regular state. Obviously, he's at like full power. But already, he's being comparable to like the 4 archangels, who are already holding about an eighth, a solid eighth of the Supreme Deity's power, which should be comparable since the Supreme Deity and Demon King are equals to the might of about an eighth of the Demon King's power. And Zeldris is able to box with him. Sure, he had the DKP amp, but even still, afterwards, he proves that he's still at that level of strength when he fights and slays the reincarnated Supreme Deity. So I can definitely say that if we're just going pure numbers wise, Bond got more than an 8 times amp when he came out of Purgatory. He got maybe just a little bit more than an 8 times amp. Just maybe a tiny bit. Just maybe a tiny bit more than 8 times amp. Like, I think you could literally make 8 Bonds, throw them all together, and they probably still aren't beating Galland. Not to talk of going toe-to-toe with the Demon King. At least if you ask me. Who knows? Maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I'm bugging. But I'd say Bond got more than a 10 times amp. More than 100 times amp. Maybe even more than 1,000 times. Like, we got to realize the gap in power that Bond leaped through the 1,000 years in Purgatory is so wide. So if you were to slap, let's just say it is 1,000. Make Zeldris 1,000 times stronger. He breaks it. He breaks the verse. He would literally go on to probably be comparable to the one ultimate Escanor, maybe even slap him up. Because the thing is, if we just go with the fact that Zeldris is around an 8th, he got a solid 8th in him. You know what I'm saying? He paid for it and he's got it. If he got an 8th in him already, imagine Brody with a little bit more than an 8th. Imagine him with an 1,000 times amp on the 8th. That would be insane. And the only reason I'm not exactly too sure about it is because that it seems like, realistically, there would be diminishing returns if you went in with a lower power state. Like, I feel like it's just unreasonable for Zeldris to get that massive of an amp in the same way that Bond did. Like, if it really was linear, I feel like Meliodas would have just hopped right back in. He'd be like, wait, before I get rid of this immortality curse, just in case, I'm gonna spend an extra day in there, and that'll be like another 1,000 years. So give me a little bit, I'll be right back. And he would have done that because the amp would have been bonkers. And we also got to consider that, are we sending Zeldris under the same conditions that we sent Meliodas and Bond in? Because another reason they could have hypothetically gotten so strong is because they were literally sparring with the Demon King for 60 years straight. Like, hypothetically, maybe they wouldn't, or other people wouldn't get the same level of amps if they weren't literally fighting the Demon King. Like, notably, all Meliodas and Bond did with Wild, essentially, for 60 years, 6 decades, was train. Bond did have a sparring partner. Like, he was in there with Mel, and after he finally broke free of that wild fox beast that his soul incarnated into, he did straight up fight Meliodas for like decades. I think it's over 100 years. Like, he was straight up in there for a hot minute just fighting with Meliodas, a rival to him. And then he fought the Demon King, a superior to him. So, like, it's not entirely unreasonable that if you were to just throw Zeldris in Purgatory without those extremely special, extremely specific conditions, then he would get way less returns because he's not specifically training. Especially if Zeldris is already adapted to the environment. Like, a big thing that made Bond so powerful was the fact that his immortality helped him consistently adapt, and his body literally naturally evolved in the way that all human bodies do in the sevendeadlysins world to external factors and new internal factors, such as the air, the meat he was eating, all the stuff like that. Like, his body was straight up developing to become a better creature to survive Purgatory. If Zeldris is able to just walk in there just fine, that he just walks in there just fine. And sure, we know that you can still probably train by yourself in the sevendeadlysins world and get some returns, but obviously a training partner helps, especially a relative one. And obviously fighting against the one of, until the end of the series, one of the strongest characters in the entire series for 60 years straight also definitely helps. So maybe, hypothetically, it wouldn't be as simple as throw Zell in for a day, he comes out 1,000 years later and he's one of the strongest characters in the verse. Maybe he just doesn't get much. He may only get twice as strong. Because you got to think about it. If Zeldris is already adapting and just spends a whole bunch of time there training by himself, who knows how big of an amp I could get. We don't have a quantifier or even any sort of thing for that. Unless, but then again, that's more than 1,000 years. You would have to send him in there for a long time. Like, notably, we don't know exactly how old Wild is. Hold on, let me double check. Maybe we do. No, we have generally no idea how old that boy is. Like, we know he has 8 billion years left, supposedly. But even still, we don't know how long he was in there. Well, actually, we do have some sort of metric. He was alive and seemingly full grown 16 years ago. And let me do some quick mathematics. Yeah, that's 8,416,000 years that Wild had. And he was already out here, like, annoying the Demon King a bit, and at his full power state where he sacrificed a lot of his life, he's even able to push the Demon King, which is pretty darn crazy. But I don't think we can. But then again, we do have 16 years. Ironically, but that's the thing. We know he didn't spend all that time in Purgatory. But we're talking in hypotheticals anyway. So, hypothetically, if we were to give Zeldris the full 16-year Purgatory treatment, say just like Hawk, he heard how Meliodas got so strong, how Bon got so strong, and said, wait a second, wait a minute, I can do this too, gosh darn it, I can do it too. And he immediately leaped in for 16 years, then yeah, he could probably be just more than strong enough on his own. Because like, I'm not exactly sure how much having multiple training partners amps you, but if he's like out here sparring against Wild for the last 8 billion years of his life, I think he could definitely become a beast, become a monster, become a absolute demon. The only thing is though, I don't think he would get the same benefits as like staying a day, like because of the special circumstances of Bon and Mel where they had like all the perfect conditions to explode in potency and ability. I don't think we can imply their growth to Zeldris specifically, especially, I mean, maybe because realistically Zeldris should have higher potential than Bon, right? Like, sure, Bon had his biology altered by the Fountain of Youth, but still, just based on their starting strength levels, or around their starting strength levels, Zeldris should have way higher potential. Not Meliodas tier potential, but still way higher potential. So for all intents and purposes, maybe he should be stronger than Bon even without the special conditions. But those are some really good special conditions. I don't know. Maybe it's not like Dragon Ball. Like notably, something in Dragon Ball that Whis explains is like, wow, it's just literally more effective to have the two of you fight each other. And referring to Goku and Vegeta in comparison to him like specifically training them himself. Because their like dualistic training, saying it's fighting each other is just more effective than specific training. I'm not sure if demons work like that, or like the species within Seven Deadly Sins work like that. Maybe not. And thus, maybe it wouldn't matter. Maybe you don't need a training partner. But assumedly, Meliodas, even when he's like being asked on if he could reach Demon King level in 3 days, he said, I could do it, just not in 3 days, even with these training partners. But then again, 3 days versus like 1,000 years is very, very different. So I'm not exactly sure where Zeldris and his potential stands relative to Bon and how much that would affect Purgatory without him having training partners. Because like, what is he really? He's just going to get 1,000 years of training in, especially if he's like just perfectly fine and already pre-adapted to the Purgatory environment. He has no reason to worry about anything. He wouldn't get any of the amps from biological adaptation or anything like that. So he would literally just be training. So it isn't necessarily, it's more so like, what if Zeldris had 1,000 years to train by himself? Reasonably, he should be extremely powerful, because we got to remember, Zeldris, despite being super, uber, duper, crazy strong, he's only 252. Brody's like 25 if you go by regular demon lifespans. If you go by his dad's lifespan, he's not even a year old yet. So 1,000 years of training would probably do him pretty darn well. You know, 4 times his lifespan of trading would probably do well. But the question is how well. He'd definitely be stronger than post-Purgatory Bon. I think there's no doubt about that. Maybe even with a Kurchus amp, I don't think post-Purgatory Bon would be as powerful as Zeldris if you give him the same just like flat multiplier amp. Say Zeldris goes in for 16 years, say he trains with Wild and Hawk, and he really gets his gains up, then he's probably up there in the TMT. Oh, is that crazy? That's so crazy to say though. Is it really likely? I don't know. 8 million. I'm talking about the 16-year path now, not just the 1 year or the 1 day path where he gets 1,000 years. But like, is it really all that bonkers? Is it really that bonkers for Zeldris to reach that level of power? Like TM status. I don't know. It feels weird though. Like Zeldris getting that powerful ever just seems unlikely to me. It feels like he's just destined to forever be in Meliodas' shadow. So I think him reaching the power of Meliodas' true magic form would be a bit too much. But like, give him 8 million years in Purgatory with someone stronger than him, ironically enough. Well, Wild versus... Do I have to do Wild versus Zeldris? I think I do. I think I already mentioned that I think Wild slams the 10 Commandments. But Maybe I do. Maybe just for extra clarification. It could be a funny battle. But legitimately, now the thing about the Zeldris could likely have a similar situation to what Meliodas and Bond had. He has the superior opponent in Wild. He has the weaker sparring partner in Hawk. And then he has himself, and he'd be the Bond surrogate here. So give him those conditions. Give him about 1,000 years or the 8 million years if you think he needs the extra time. And he's probably out here swinging even when True Magic Mel at his full power. Sure, would the plot demand that Mel still be stronger? Yes. And could you argue that even with... I mean, it depends on how much you want to take that knockoff statement into account. If you really believe that TM is like just an inch away from chaos, then maybe he wouldn't be that powerful because King Mel's way, way stronger than he was before. So maybe Zeldris would be in a really weird spot. Overall, I think lowballing it, he would be around Demon King level, like straight up just equivalent to his father and the Supreme Deity. He's just there now. There's no contentions about it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. He's just strong enough to do that now. He's strong enough to compete with them directly. That's the lowballing it, and that's giving him like the 1,000-year treatment, all that good stuff. But if we like really give him that good sauce, we really give him that next level Zon, really pump him up a little bit, give him the proper conditions, give him the proper training partners, and give him that 8 million years. I think he's up there with True Magic Mel. He may be up there trying to contest Chaos himself. However, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Do you think Zeldris would be weaker, stronger, somewhere in between? Let me know in the comment section down below. On both sides too, on the 1,000-year path and the 8 million year path. Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure the little notifications bell so you miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do a Patreon down below. Use more videos as $1 exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with the Pencil, writing off.